So, good morning. I'm here with Elizabeth Stauder, and Elizabeth Stauder is with the Body and Soul Sanctuary. So, it's bodyandsoulsanctuary.com. And she's really focused on something that's near and dear to my heart, which is the heroine's journey. And the heroine's journey, both from a mythic sense, but really from the sense that's all of our lives are exactly that. We're on a life process, a life trajectory that sometimes involves healing, sometimes involves growing, sometimes involves feeling really good, sometimes involves feeling not so good. And so one of the things that she's really working on is supporting people in the direction of not just surviving and getting by or dealing with or managing challenges, but to be moving in the way of thriving, flourishing. I think if I remember reading your materials, you talk about soul aligned living. And I love that because the word aligned has become an important word in my own life. So I look forward to hearing more about that.
Yes.
So yeah, so welcome.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here and to talk about the heroine's journey.
Yeah, good, good, good. And I know you've been on your own heroine's journey, as we all have. And so maybe just starting out a little bit with giving us a beginning overarching trajectory. What's kind of been the main arc that has gotten you to where you are today, doing what you are doing today?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of components to it, but the simple answer is actually seeing my life as a heroine's journey and embodying that really. And looking back to childhood before some of the crises that happened later in my life that took me through sort of an initiation and reorganization of sorts. I was always fascinated by myth and mythology and mystery and like the mystic poets and just the sense of, I suppose you could say what some people might call the journey of awakening or enlightenment. And so that was kind of like a compass that was set pretty early in my life. And what I observed was that going through life, there was often a disconnect between that part of my life and the humaning part of my life, like going to school and getting like I did very well performatively, but there was some soul aspect that just didn't know how it fit into society. So I often felt like a black sheep. Um, I think that's why I've always been interested in systems theory. I know the training we both have in OI is based in systems, but in college I also studied sociology. After college, I went and traveled to different places in the world and stayed with Indigenous people. And I was fascinated by learning different languages and systems and ways of doing things. And the fact that people could be so diverse in how they speak and how they act. And yet there could be these universal patterns that I saw across everything. So I'm always fascinated by that. I think going into the health crisis that led to my most recent heroine's journey, which resulted in me doing this work now publicly, it was really useful to go in with some of that frame already in my system. And so then to go through an incredibly dysregulating event, it was triggered by a vaccine injury in 2021 in the fall. And everything in my system went into severe dysregulation. So dysautonomia is an autoimmune condition that affects all the systems of the body. So my immune system was going haywire, my hormones were going haywire, I was awake when I should be sleeping, and all kinds of things. All of the channels that we speak about in therapy were hijacked. I couldn't even close my eyes and go into my imagination without it sounding like going into a radio station where like loud noises and disturbing images were just kind of being thrown into my psyche. So there was a feeling of having no boundary. Like literally, there was no boundary in any area of my experience. But this concept stayed with me about the heroine's journey. And I appreciate that you said it's not always feeling good. But I think what it gave me the opportunity to discover is that there is something that feels better than just the comfort of us I don't want to use the word stable, a static existence. Um, Sometimes, you know, there are moments where we need to go through a shakeup in order to wake up to another level of pleasure, in the sense of existential meaning, and also I would say somatically as well. Um, and it's interesting because right before all that happened, I remember tuning in the way that we do, those of us who practice somatics, and I felt so at pleasure and at one within my body, more than I'd ever felt in my entire life. And it was like within days that then I had this injury and everything went the other direction. But I remember that moment. So, um, yeah, here I am. And there's a long story there, but I'll let you say something now.
Yeah, cool. So you know, and you already mentioned OI, which is short for organic intelligence, and that's a practice that both Elizabeth and I have been trained in. And so one of the things that we do in that is not go diving for the problem or the what's wrong first. So I'm going to follow that, and what I'm kind of the first thing that struck my curiosity is you talking about how as a youngin you had this interest in myth and story and those kinds of ways of being, and you were existing in the world quite well, and it felt a little disconnected from that space that you got to enjoy. And out of curiosity, I was thinking, what were the myths that might have been your favorite, or which ones were the ones you felt like you most
Mhm.
connected to when you were young? I don't know if you have a clear sense of that or in a way that you can share, but that was what was kind of the first place that caught my
Yeah.
attention.
Sure. I was always making up stories, and a lot of the ones that I would get drawn into were stories where, say, a main character would find a magic door or portal into another world, where they would um, maybe at first think they were escaping the troubles of their lives, but what they were really doing was uh, getting their resources and the fun adventures and the characters that they needed to connect with in their life in order to overcome whatever inner turbulence was there, and kind of story that I was always very drawn to. Um, yeah, and one other one that comes to mind, I think it was maybe middle school when the first of the Lord of the Rings movies came out, and I remember having this fantasy that I would be the daughter of the elven queen and the human king, the one that would bring together that realm of immortality and the embodiment of human experience. And I was like, oh, yes, that.
Wow, which is really, from what I can tell, very much part of what you do today is bringing
Yes,
those two together.
I do. Yes,
Wow,
yes,
cool.
yes. And I
Cool.
had, before I found organic intelligence, I did a lot of training in more ancient systems of healing, such as shamanic soul retrieval, for example, and energy healing. Yeah, and there's a component that made sense to me in some ways. I mean, and at this point, I don't really see them differently, but there's a clinical and neuroscience way that we do this that helps our modern brain understand what's going on scientifically. But ancient peoples understood how to bring the body and soul together as almost like the core or the root of whatever ailment you could put under the umbrella, whether it's mental health, physical health, emotional, whatever the turbulence is, some kind of way of wrapping it all in a large unified way of seeing it was almost as if the soul had somehow become disconnected from the body. And so instead of fixating so much on the category of what was wrong, you know, what does the body, soul, and mind need to call home that soul piece? And what I love about this is it also brings it into the collective as much as the individual, because we have our individual essence, you could say. But when we start talking about the level of soul, we're also talking about things that really connect and unify all humans. And so I've also come to see it as much of a collective endeavor as a personal healing endeavor.
Mm, mm, mm.
Mhm.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, and you just use the word healing, and so in your, your synopsis there, you mentioned this moment that you felt um, this really profound, connecting, healing, connected to your own well-being moment. And then shortly thereafter, evidence, symptoms of a vaccine injury showed up. And like I think you mentioned, like almost like days apart, that was really close
Yeah,
together. And
yeah.
you use this phrase that I thought was really interesting is that sometimes we need to have a shake up to wake up, right?
Yes,
And it sounds like that's a little bit of what
absolutely.
you experience. I'm wondering if you could give us just a kind of a little bit of an understanding of what that
Mhm.
experience was like for you to go through that, to go through this feeling this really great moment and then this assuming some kind of a crash in a sense, but pretty significant. So, I'm
Yeah,
curious that
yeah,
like how you're experiencing that would be just the simple way to say that.
yeah. Yeah, thank you for the question. And I love that I learned recently that the word crisis also has in it, somehow it means crossroads. I don't remember how that etymology got figured out, but I always now when I hear the word crisis, that's actually what I'm thinking, crossroads.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, I mean, I think what it taught me in an embodied way, which I already maybe conceptually understood, is that our essence is a verb and not a noun. Our essence is in motion. Um, the indestructible part of ourselves is not a static and fixed thing, but an ever changing and moving thing. And so I was forced, like everything in my life stopped. Relationships fell apart. I couldn't go to work. I couldn't even chop my own vegetables or vacuum my own house because I was bedridden for a time. It
Wow.
was that severe. I
Wow.
even had a day where I had to call the neighbor to come in and bring me some electrolytes to drink because I couldn't get off the floor.
Mm.
So it was very severe. And yes, and I thank you for the compassion because it was, I mean, that's actually a perfect indication of what it taught me too, is like, compassion is the ultimate medicine. Uh, Strength to change emerges from total acceptance and compassion. And then the curiosity to be with. And I love that you talk about shame because, to me, I see it in a similar way that it's the thing that sort of stops the soul essence from expressing itself. So, yes, I was stopped from expressing in all of the ways I was used to expressing, all the ways I identified as a capable, physically capable human, an emotionally available person in other people's lives, all the ways that I saw myself as having meaning or purpose were completely obliterated, and I had to face all of the guilt and shame um, and get into those existential questions of like, well, what value do I have if I'm literally like pretty much a corpse, and I like can't do anything for anybody, much less that I need them just to take care of me almost like a child. It brought me into a place of severe, severely sort of like being up against those places in myself that still believe those ways subconsciously that I didn't realize. Like nothing was stopping me from seeing that. And so but I embraced it. And I fought for quite a while. I fought it for a long time. As long as I had energy in there to fight it, I was like, I don't want to see this shit. No, you know.
Yeah.
But I mean, I have memories. I entered a deep time space, and I can't remember. It was several thresholds maybe of fighting, and then fighting less and less until I got to a place of pure surrender, and I said, if all I ever do for the rest of my life is just lie here in my apartment and let myself be bathed in some kind of existential compassion for what I'm experiencing, like something good will come of that. I have to trust that, even if I can't see tomorrow, even if I don't know if I'll survive this, because that was a question for a while, actually. I
Wow.
was close to organ failure.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Just to help people who might be listening have a little bit more of an understanding, like you talked about fighting it, and I'm curious, like
Mhm.
what were some of the thoughts that were happening? What were some of the emotions that were happening? I mean, if you were to the point of near organ failure, I can imagine that one at some point you do get to the point where I guess there's nothing I can do. And so there is a surrendering point. And we can't force surrender on ourselves, right? Like it sounds like it was something that emerged. But before that, there was a whole bunch of other thoughts and feelings and sensations and things that were happening to you. I'd like to be able to share with people, if you're willing to whatever degree feels okay, what you
Mhm.
were experiencing on that
Yeah.
level.
Yeah. One of the big ones that comes to mind is an extreme case of fear of missing out. Um, Fear of everybody else gets to have a life, and this fear of like, um, yeah, like a fear of being forever isolated from life and other people, and well, other, not just people, but connection, aliveness. Um, it's funny because yes, there was fear of death, but I think sticking with the process, that fear was quickly overtaken by other fears. Like at one point, I was like, I would prefer death because fear of that the pain never going away, and the pain felt like torture, right? And so that sort of freeze fear of this is going to be like this forever.
Yeah.
Um,
And you're talking mostly like physical pain or emotional pain or
all
both.
of the above, all of the above. Yeah, yeah. Because one of the symptoms as well were these mast cell flares that happen, especially at night. So it would feel like every time I went to rest, I would go almost into, well, to the same caliber as an anaphylactic reaction. So every time my system tried to let down, it was like someone turned the lever up to 1,000 on my stress chemistry in a matter of seconds,
Wow.
or a second sometimes.
Oof.
Um, so it felt like I was in this torture chamber. And I even remember being like, there was a period of time in which I could kind of predict that I would have every other night a full night of not sleeping. And then every night, every other night in between, I would be able to sleep for a window of time because I had gotten so exhausted that my system would fully crash and be not even able to dream or anything. Like it wouldn't even, yeah. And so I would like be like look forward to whenever that crash might happen, um, and kind of try to build on that. That's a whole nother conversation. But um, yeah, what came up a lot too, and I didn't notice this right away because I was just trying to have my body survive, but it became really apparent not too long in was um, basically all the ways in which I felt, and I would say this is still the case, although I have a different way of working with it now from agency, but just disappointment and the level of trauma and dissociation that still just exists in culture. Because I was finding both when I would go to try to get medical help and also in my social relationships, the way that people would react to my experience, it was very rare to find someone who actually had the kind of quality of presence that I needed to feel not alone in the experience. So there was a lot of my frustration and disappointment in the ways that I didn't have relational attunement for my entire life. Because there would be a mix of some people getting afraid for me in a way that was not helpful or trying to fix the situation. And then other people who completely kind of blow me off or gaslight me. And it felt like, you know, and so it was, so I think that also contributed to a lot of the loneliness and the fear of missing out, but it also, in an odd way, helped to illuminate the core pattern in this way of the heroine's journey, right? And I mean, I won't go into too much detail for the sake of time, but in short, I went through a total rebirthing. So I allowed myself to actually return to what felt like now I talk about the cosmic womb in my program and the work that I do, but it was like I entered that space again and let my psyche go through that whole journey of coming into the world, being in the womb, birthing into the world again, with the awareness in stark contrast to the things that were disappointing and scary and frustrating about what I was finding in my relational world. Because a lot of relationships fell away at the same time this happened too. So it was this kind of combination of, oh my gosh, my body is falling apart and I don't have anyone I can count on. I feel completely alone. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and that is so common in the world of physical illnesses, especially physical illnesses where it's an unknown, like what's exactly happening to you. It was connected to a pretty fear-based time as it relates to a pandemic, and then the attempts to do something to help save the world from the pandemic. And so, vaccine injury, there's going to people are going to have opinions about that and whether it's a true thing or not a true thing. I'm guessing that was all mixed into
Oh
your
man. Yeah.
experience, right?
Very much so.
And then in that, you mentioned, you just kind of touched on a little bit ago, the shame and guilt that came in. I would wonder if also like maybe even regrets start showing up in that, because it
Mm-hmm.
seems like there was a very, okay, you made a choice to do something that you thought was in your best interest, and it turned out
Yes.
not to be in
Yes.
your best interest in your particular
Yes.
case. Yeah, I'm just kind of curious, what were some of the
Yes.
things along those lines that might have been happening for you?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up and noticing that because it actually is the thing that led me to do an in-depth study of betrayal trauma because I did recognize that that was a core part of my story. And so, yes, there is a feeling, that feeling of betrayal of like I put my trust in something that was supposed to be stable and help make my life safer, but it did the opposite. And so there were a lot of regrets, not just about that, but also about lots of other choices I'd made throughout life. Now I have more of a full cycle. Yes, that was for learning, but as we know, you can't skip and bypass. Actually, I had a lot of anger about ways that I trusted in situations that were ultimately not actually aligned with my highest good. And so it taught me too, it also taught me a lot about I spoke about how the feeling that I had was like I had no boundaries. And I learned a lot about how that applies in the terrain. So, not just psychologically boundaries, but leaky gut and leaky brain, for example, where you can't even trust that if you eat a clean food, it's not going to go bouncing around inside of your chemistry and create havoc. Um, but I had to touch those regrets and that deep anger both personally for the ways in my life I felt I had been betrayed, and then also the system at large and the way that I still felt that's something that I believe, despite what people think about different political situations or the vaccine or COVID or any of that, there's a lesson around getting away from the content of what's right or wrong and understanding what attunement and safety really means in terms of how you can rely on something. Um, it's a whole nother conversation about like whether betrayal is something that necessarily needs to be done with awareness by the person that you're leaning into and then find you can't trust, or whether it's their own trauma, naivety, or obliviousness. But it's a real thing to reckon with, to come out of a state of, wow, I was trusting in something and I found that it actually hijacked me and it created a state of extreme hypersensitivity, which was wise. I don't want to stay there forever, but recognizing the wisdom in hypersensitivity as actually not coming out of nowhere, not being the crazy lady disease like all those women that got crazy and whatever that time era was. It's like, no, The body is wise, the psyche is wise. Something is going on here that's showing me something important. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You know, there's a the phrase betrayal trauma is you don't hear that a lot, and
Mm,
makes a lot of sense that describes very often the experience that people feel in life. Sometimes it's specific things or specific people. Sometimes it's the feeling that life itself has betrayed
yes.
you,
Yes.
or the higher power, God. But really, this idea that life is itself is betraying you can lead to some really, really intense feelings of despair, I would think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that you brought that to the existential level because that was a core part of my journey for
Mhm.
sure,
Oh, yeah, I
with
bet.
being faced with death and mortality and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt. And it's we I talk about in my world of shame, and at core biologically what shame is a premature interruption of either pleasant activation or pleasant deactivation. Now, I know that's a big mouthful, but basically it's if you are enjoying something, you're enjoying, you're going on with life, and life is feeling really good, and you have this really great moment, and then slam, something really out of the blue prematurely interrupts that goodness, that you can't help but have the physiology that we often name as shame, which is that
Yeah.
collapsy, freezy, the thoughts of, what did I do wrong, and how did I get here, and how is this my fault, and all the things that come along with that. That's just inherent with, hey, I'm doing life, I'm enjoying life, I'm having a good experience, and then something really, took the rug out from underneath you. And I think that's a really common experience that many people experience.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So you went through, then you describe having almost like a rebirthing experience, right? And
Mhm.
so obviously there was the mythic journey out of this, and then there was probably the very physical elements too, practices maybe. Um, so maybe just kind of, uh, and I know in this kind of stuff, you've usually tried a bunch of things. Some things work, some things don't work, and you just have to do the game of trial and feedback and see how
Yeah.
that works. Along the way, in terms of coming out, maybe if there's a few things that you want to highlight and name that was particularly supportive
Mm.
and helpful for you,
Mhm.
that would be
Yeah.
also helpful for people listening, would be cool.
Yeah, for me, it was finding the interventions that I could align with my systems oriented way of thinking. So things that weren't just about, say, targeting a symptom, but that were about creating stability for the whole system. So, for example, learning about nutrition as a way to restore the ecosystem, the balance of the terrain of the body, to give it the proper nourishment and capacity to then have the strength to rebuild boundaries and to eliminate things that were toxic to it. So learning about the physiological way to do that was really, really important for me. In particular, learning about that from a perspective of nourishment first and then supporting detox to happen. Um, yeah, what else? Yeah, also training my circadian rhythm, which is something very similar to, like in nervous system work, we're always trying to do that activation, deactivation, rhythmicity, but really tuning with the planetary and saying, okay, if right now there really isn't any feeling of regulation anywhere, at the very least, I can try to get the sunlight in my eyes at dawn and be in bed when it's dark. And there's something, and I had to really shepherd my system in that, especially with how wonky everything was. But to kind of like taking a child and being like, it's morning, so we're gonna crawl out even though we could barely move, and we're gonna, come down. And even if we're not sleeping tonight, We're going to listen to a soothing meditation, and we're going to put hands here and there, and we're going to be as much as possible in the down regulating side of things, even though it seems like everything in you wants to do the opposite. So using the rhythms of nature and the planet to help aid regulation was also really important. And I'd say doing a lot of um, I did a lot of time reclaiming my channel. So first it was not with other humans, but in some of my like shamanic studies, I had already developed a kind of relationship with the etheric world, and like how and who and what wants to show up as a way to support my journey, and noticing and tracking how that could somatically start to take me into a better place, and eventually then bringing that into my life. And like I said, the rebirthing, and actually taking that journey all the way back through my life, through different conversations and relationships, and reworking, you could say, my whole journey, really. Even at times it felt like, whether you believe in past lives or just ways that the psyche was tuning into that collective consciousness, I couldn't point to a particular memory of my own, but there was some relational reorganizing going on at a level, and I would trust it. And I would track that when I would do that work, physical symptoms would shift. And so I was really tracking the way people talk about the mind body connection. I was really tracking in real time how, when I would make these neuroplastic shifts, the physiology would follow, which was really
Wow.
powerful.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. And I'm just I'm reminded of a conversation that I listened to, a podcast I listened to. Occasionally, I'll listen to the three Jungians, and they were discussing labyrinths the other day, and how, when you approach a labyrinth, which is a kind of a maze that is meant that you enter in and you walk through, because there's like stones or other objects that create a pattern, and you're walking in such a way that it takes quite some time in a small circle. It takes quite some time to get to the center. And she was the one of the people talking, was
Yes.
saying how, you know when people approach a labyrinth, they never cut through, because you could just step over the rocks in the path and go to the middle, like that's perfectly, you could, but we
Yeah.
don't,
Yeah.
because there's something in us that knows that, well, the point of coming to a labyrinth is to walk and ambulate and circulate and take the journey to get there.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's not about getting to the center. It's not the most efficient way to get to the center or even effective.
Mhm.
It's the process that you're going through, and how life is really quite like that. That
Yeah.
there's really no shortcuts to the center, and it really matches your idea of the
Mhm.
heroine's journey. That along the way there are, portals that we may go through, and we think we're taking shortcuts. We're trying to get out of things, and then the reality is, it is a process. And you mentioned of gathering resources, gathering wisdom, gathering relationship support, all of that, shedding, ideas and thoughts and so forth that are no longer serving one, in order to, what is the center? I'm not sure, right? But like even in a labyrinth, yes, you're taking the path to get to the center, but, well, you just will walk out of it again, right? So I just was struck by listening to your experience, how much you had to trust that journey, and at some point of the journey, wow, I'm sure trusting in your healing nature was pretty difficult at different times.
Yes, it was. And I love that image of the labyrinth, because what I was visualizing as you were saying that was almost as if the center sometimes seems like it changes, um, only because that's as far as we can see. in the current reality that we inhabit, right? And so I think that's where the trust and the free fall came in, was like it did feel like that center was completely lost. And what's the point of continuing to walk this if there is no center? I don't even trust that it's there. That gets into that betrayal by the universe kind of complex. Um, but what it did, and I know, when we talk about identity evolution or moving into our true nature as something that's in process versus static, like there's a way that we have to break through whatever we thought the center was and actually let go of that for a time and wait and watch as it reconfigures in an even more powerful way. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's a really powerful point that we have a tendency to think that we know the destination that we're going, and then we think, oh, I'm now off track of whatever that destination is, and that can bring in a lot of increased levels of suffering, as opposed to, being able to stay in that curious, open place of, and I wonder what is next for me in healing or growth, as it may be. As thinking about people who might be experiencing either a chronic illness, in your case, it was a fairly acute illness that became more chronic-y. And that could be physical illness or just the general suffering of the body, mind, being. Um, just any thoughts as we kind of maybe come to a close that you might want to share in general with people like that to be
Mm.
supportive, encouraging. Like what would you want if you had,
Yeah.
5 minutes to share with
Yeah.
people? Yeah, some of the grand wisdom that you've discovered in this experience.
I would I would say that just because it seems so normalized in culture that these things are set in stone, like to really not be willing to be curious about that. And I mean, it's only relatively recent that we have the amount of chronic illness and disease on the planet that we do. For a lot of history, it was actually not the case. People would only really suffer from like an acute accident and die. Like the kind of cumulative things that we're dealing with are not actually our true nature. They're not inevitable. I guess just to provide hope that there is a way through these situations. I would encourage training your attention toward people and situations who have gone through and overcome that. That was a really big thing for me, because our mirror neurons are so important in the journey. So even if your mind is like, yeah, I know, I know that I'm not fated to this, but I can't get away from the feeling like I have to, like other people could maybe make it out, but I can't. Put
Mm,
yourself around those people, like put yourself in the company of people who've walked it, and you'll start to feel in your own physiology, oh yeah, it's possible for me to do this too. And also even beyond humans, look to nature. The natural world is incredibly resilient and regenerative. um, the more that you train your senses to the resilience and regenerative nature of nature, the more your body might remember, oh yes, I too am part of that. And just so much, so much, so much compassion. uh, Let yourself try things. Let yourself become your own leader of your path of healing, because it will then lead to you also learning how to lead your own path in life, which is the gift that came out of it for me, is that now I know how to do that. And I wouldn't change any of it for the fact that I know how to do that now, which is the greatest gift of all.
I feel, I think like you, and I really appreciate that you brought this up, this idea of surrounding yourself with people who have done that. And so for me, it was suffering right with chronic debilitating shame that and made it very difficult to get up from day to day to day. And part of why I do what I do is to be able to help people find somebody who has come out of that, right? And you're one of those people who has found this way to not only have come out of an illness, but to have really found a deeper sense of who you are, what you are about. And so you too are one of those people that people could seek out and find if they're experiencing that kind of chronic illness. Because you're right about the fact that somebody who's experiencing a chronic illness might not find as much value from connecting to somebody like me as they might with you, just because you have insights into how they are experiencing that in a way that I might not have in the same way. And so that's kind of a little segue into maybe giving you, a minute or so just to say a little bit of what you do so that people could connect with you in that way, because I love people to connect with the person who is the right one for them at that time of wherever they are in their journey. So yeah, feel free to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you. So doing this work to heal myself led to the emergence of a curriculum that just kind of came through that channel, which was so beautiful. I call it the metamorphosis process. So it really is on that, that archetypal metaphor of the caterpillar going into the chrysalis, going through the crossroads of the crises and out the other side as a butterfly, moving in the world very differently than they went into the chrysalis or the cave or the initiation container. And so I was doing, and I'm still doing one-to-one sessions, but I've really shifted my attention to holding a group initiation container for us to go through this together, because I have found that it really provides that, a tribe of people with a tribe instead of without a tribe, like that, the feeling, the felt sense of being in an ecosystem that's doing this work together, and it exponentially increases the experience. So I do that in a what I call the body and soul sanctuary. And the best way to tune in with that is to go to my website, as you mentioned, bodyandsoulsanctuary.com. And there's a link there to a free version of the community, which is just a good place to start to have a conversation and learn about that. It's called the Body and Soul Village. And we do offer free community events at every equinox and solstice, which is a nice place to try it out and just be in that space together, and then speak further if you want to go deeper in to have that experience in the
Yeah, it's so
container.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. And I'll put that information in the description so people have access to that. Elizabeth, thank you so much. I know this is just skimming the surface, and you said like really profound things. And so my hope is that people will occasionally like stop and go, wait, what did she just say? And rewind a little bit and listen again. And so, yes, we did a really quick through about your experience, and at the same time, like I said, I think there's a lot of deep wisdom there. And I'm hoping that people really appreciate and enjoy being able to take those words in and let them sink in for themselves.
Aw, thank you. I appreciate the way that you drew it out with your questions. It's been a delightful conversation. Thanks.
That it has been. Thank you.